Good morning. A few years ago, a generous gift from some friends. Lisa and I got to spend some time in France. As part of that vacation, we got a private tour of a French castle that had been built in the 10th century. It was 1,000 years old. Still resided and watched over by a duke and a duchess. They don't have any power anymore, but they still have that title. I've got a picture of him. He was well into his 80s. They're an eccentric couple. He is carrying on an argument in front of us how a proper castle has to have a proper moat. She says a proper moat has proper mosquitoes and it's not going to happen. And so till the day he dies, he will be arguing for a moat. I guarantee you, till the day she dies, there will never be a moat around this castle. Now, normally as a part of this tour, there's a guide that just takes you through, but as they introduce us, the Duke and Duchess will just kind of welcome you. But he became entranced with my wife, which is an easy thing to do, and shocked the tour guide by going around the whole castle with us, giving us sort of a personal tour. And we got up into the family chapel. He pulled my wife aside and he said, "Would you like to see my ancestors?" And Lisa's like, "Okay." And I'll show you the picture of him pulling Lisa aside. You could see she's a little bit shocked there because when you see what was actually in the box that he opened up for her, it was his ancestors' bones. But they were with him. That's what he was showing her. We got down near the end of the tour to the study area where it was really the courthouse, to be honest, for centuries. It's where the Duke would rule over people. And he explained to me for the first time I understood the energy and the violence and the passion behind the French Revolution. Because a duke had absolute reign over his duchy. He just, as one man, because of who his father was, he got to decide whether you were guilty or you were innocent. He could decide whether you went to prison or to the gallows, whether you went free or not. He could decide whether you got the land or they got the land, you got the woman, they got the woman. He had absolute control and nobody could really challenge him. And so after centuries of this, the people were saying, why should we follow this guy, this normal guy, just because he had a famous dad? He was in that bloodline. Now, it's hard for us to understand growing up in a democracy what it was like to live under centuries of tyrannical rule. But here's what's so key. The Bible was written entirely under that form of government. Whenever a biblical writer is penning the words of God, they have this assumption that there is a king that rules. There are people by divine right that they thought that ruled. Don't think democracy when you're reading these passages. They had absolute reign. That's what we see in Daniel when he's talking of Nebuchadnezzar and he explains this tyrannical rule. He says this, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language. Nebuchadnezzar was so powerful, he didn't just rule over his kingdom, but all the people of the world had to give way to him. They feared and trembled before him because whomever he wished he killed, whomever he wished he spared alive, and whomever he wished he elevated, and whomever he wished he humbled. Okay, so you got to leave the 21st century democratic mindset. Put yourself in biblical times when one person can have entire reign over you to understand the radical call to life and freedom of Psalm 146 that we read in worship together just a few minutes ago. When the psalmist says this in 146 verse 3, do not trust in princes, in mortal man in whom there is no salvation, that sounded absurd because he did determine whether you lived or died. And so to say not to trust in him would be sort of like somebody getting sick and somebody saying, well, don't worry, just pray. You don't need those doctors. Or somebody's threatening you with a mug and say, don't worry about it, just make the sign of the cross. You can't shoot me, I'm making the sign of the... It would sound that dumb, that foolish when he's saying don't trust in men who could literally kill you or keep you alive. But the psalmist is trying to get the people of God to go deeper, saying there's a deeper truth. On the surface, it seems like the king's reign, but not really. Instead of trusting in mortal man, it says, trust in God. Put your hope in God. Verse 4, it says, the king is simply a man who will die. His spirit departs. He returns to the earth. He reigns for a while, but when he dies, all of the favor that you've accumulated with him dies as well. Instead, if you want a righteously centered life, it says, put your hope in the Lord. Verse 5, blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is in the Lord, whom you can't see. And so it's this dramatic transfer. Don't trust in the powers that you can see and feel. Trust in the real powers behind the scenes that you might not be able to see, but they're even more powerful. You might say, well, why would I do that? Well, let's see. Verse 6, God made all that is. Verse 7 and 8, he actually provides justice for the oppressed, food for the hungry, freedom for prisoners. He gives encouragement. Verse 9, we're told ultimately he will thwart the way of the wicked. In 9 and 10, we're told his reign, far from a king's that ends at death, will be forever to all generations. See, we'll never understand this psalm until we understand it as a people that were raised under tyrannical rule. Now, living in a democracy, we don't look to kings for our political authority, but you know what? We look to fallen people, we look to mortal men and mortal women, often for our sense of value, worth, meaning, and self-esteem. And that is just as foolish. And that's where Psalm 146 would apply today. And so the Bible suggests that worship is what sets us free from a frustrating life of having to be ruled by others. We're to be ruled by God. We're to be ruled by our hope in God. It puts us on a right path to life. And I would suggest we cannot sustain right priorities in life apart from earnestly pursuing worship. What is worship? Three-part definition here. Worship is apprehending and proclaiming God's goodness, power, and glory. It's putting myself up there so that I can perceive God's goodness, his glory. I'm reminded of his power. I'm just finding a way to sit in his presence, to apprehend it and be convinced of it, and then to proclaim it to others. But there's a second part. In the presence of God, you see this all throughout Scripture. He both convicts and he affirms. I don't know how God pulls it off, but he always does it that way. He can challenge us, he convicts us, but he does it in such an encouraging way that he builds us up. We feel like we've been healed, not just condemned. And so we go to him in worship. We'll be challenged, but in the midst of being challenged, we'll be lifted up. And then this is so key. This is where we often cut off worship, but there's a key third part. It means that we let him align our will with his. We want his heart to rule. We want his ways to rule. And so part of worship is letting him make a transformation in our life. And because we live in such a difficult world, this has to happen every day. If you consider this your worship in the week, you will be buried before dinner time tonight. Worship isn't like going to Costco a couple times a month or once a month. It's like having to turn on the water faucet. It's something you do throughout the day. That's how much worship has to become a part of our life. Now, why is that so key? I want to talk about 3 ways that worship sets up our lives to honor God and to have the most fulfilling life. First thing worship does is that it detaches us from unhealthy desires. Worship is God's tool to detach us from unhealthy desires. Some of you have tried to leave the ways of the world. You've tried to leave sin, but you haven't detached your heart from it. And so you keep finding yourself going back. When I was in high school, I bought a lot of dyed yellow roses. In Puyallup, Washington at the time, you couldn't buy natural yellow roses, but my girlfriend's favorite flowers were yellow roses, so I'd have to buy white roses, and then you dye them, and I would hand them to her. That's what she liked. We didn't have a particularly healthy relationship. In the course of about 18 months, we probably broke up about 8 or 9 times. Wanting to be a nice guy, every time we'd break up, I would get those white flowers, I would have them dye them, and I would give them to her, and she'd say, "Oh, Gary's so nice, I can't believe he did that. So why did we break up in the first place?" And so she calls me, and I'm like, "I don't know." And so we get back together, another 8 weeks, break up, go through the flowers again. The thing is, we could think in our head, maybe this isn't working. Maybe there's a reason we shouldn't be dating, but we weren't detached in our hearts. And so we were trying to pull away mentally without being detached in our hearts. Anybody else tried that? In any area of life, you know this isn't good for you. I'm not just talking about relationships. You know this isn't good. You know this isn't healthy. You can think your way, I'm not going to do this anymore, but your heart is still there. And so you fall right back into it. Now, I haven't purchased dyed yellow roses in over 3 decades. I say, why not? Because I fell in love with another woman. She happens to be an organic woman. And if I gave her anything that was dyed, she said, that's toxic. You're trying to make me sick. I mean, it wouldn't be received with sweet feelings of romance. It would be considered an assault. So a new affection detached me from a prior one. And that's what worship does. It changes our hearts. If I could just say something, as evangelical Christians, we are so good at trying to change our behavior without detaching our hearts. And it doesn't work very well. We think we can just grit our teeth. We think we can just stop. But we never think to address our hearts. We only focus on the behavior. But instead of gritting your teeth, why not open your heart to God on a regular basis? Trying to behave without worshiping is sort of like trying to drive cross country without filling up the gas tank. You're not going to get very far. You can coast for a while, but it's not going to happen. A lack of worship today equals a lack of strength tomorrow. We keep wondering, why do we stumble? Why do we fall? Because we're addressing the behavior. We're not building a heart that desires what God does. And that's what worship does. It shapes our heart. We see His beauty, we're convicted, we're affirmed, and then He aligns our will with His. If we don't do that, we're going to keep falling back. Now listen to me on this. I know some of you in the last week, and maybe a few of you last night, did something you're really ashamed of. You hate what happened. We've all been there. Let's be honest. We've all been in those moments. And you woke up afterwards, I can't believe I did that. I'm never going to do that again. And if you're honest, you've said that 100 times. Why do you keep going back? Because you haven't detached your heart. You need to focus on the positive. How do I begin to build a heart that worships God, that is mesmerized by God, not that is drawn away to this thing that's destructive or this thing that is hurting me? Instead of focusing on not doing something negative, how far is that getting you? Preemptively do something positive. Maybe worship is something I do on Sunday morning, but I need to figure out how to make worship a bigger part of my life. Not only does worship set us free from unhealthy desires, it sets us free from unhealthy people. It sets us free from the judgments of unhealthy people. My cousin died of AIDS about 20 years ago. He was a heroin addict. It's time when AIDS was pretty much a death sentence. And we were asking him, we knew, Kevin, why would you do this? I mean, people knew about the needles. They knew about them. I mean, why would you do this? And he said, well, we couldn't trust the dealers, so we would go in there and he would give us a little bit after we gave him our money. We had to shoot up a little bit to make sure he gave us the good stuff before we walked out. I'm like, okay, let me get this straight. You don't trust him not to cheat you, so you take what he gives you and you send it into your veins? I mean, he could kill you if he wanted to. It sounds so insane, but that's what a drug addict does. They know they're putting themselves in an unhealthy situation. And that's what a social addict does. You know you can't trust this person. They might be a dysfunctional boss. They might be a dysfunctional parent. It might be a dysfunctional social group. And you admit, I can't trust you, but how I feel about myself depends on whether you like me or not. How I feel about myself is dependent on whether you affirm me or you're finally pleased with me. And some of you younger people in junior high and high school, you're letting I'm sorry, but rather insignificant peer groups whose names you won't remember in 20 or 30 years, who will maybe some of them, half of them, just dream about a touchdown catch or something they made back in the day. You're letting them, at that stage of their life, determine whether you matter, whether you're important, what you do, and how you behave, and your relationship with the Lord. And you could just say, how foolish is that? Don't you want to be defined by the God who loves you and accepts you and affirms you? Refuse to let a lesser being, a mortal man or woman, pronounce judgment on your value, your purpose, your actions, and your life. They're not worth it. Put your hope in God, not in somebody who reigns, whether they reign at your workplace, whether they reign at your sports team, whether they reign in your social group. They shouldn't determine your well-being. Because sometimes, let's face it, sometimes the ones we love the most hurt us the most. Doing a lot of marriage stuff and weddings, I heard from a guy, and this is like one of the worst wedding stories I've ever heard. His name Josh. It was a small wedding. The pastor was there. It was one of those small towns where everybody knew everybody. All the friends were gathered. The bride's family is right there. The groom's family is right there. And Josh is reciting his vows. He's like, Josh, take you, Brianna, to be my happily wedded wife, to have and to hold. And he noticed some whispers and some gas. In better, for worse, for richer, for poor. And his new bride's face is just white, and she's starting almost to cry. And he doesn't realize what's going on until he realizes he's not standing next to Brianna. Brianna was his high school girlfriend who's sitting in the back. Now, you get one wedding, all right? And unfortunately, it was taped. She still loved the man. They still got married, but she will live with that for the rest of her life. Everybody will laugh about it for the rest of her life. She doesn't get a do-over in that case. Whether we're faulty, whether we're just whatever, people hurt us, even the people we love the most. But worship gives us freedom that if we are so loved and accepted by the only one who matters, then everybody else's opinion doesn't really count so much. I'm a big fan of Francis of Assisi, just his life. And I've seen the cell where his father literally imprisoned him. It's this small little brick cubbyhole, this tiny little thing. He was in prison there for 9 months because his dad thought he was a religious fanatic. He thought he would wreck his life, so he thought he could just imprison his son to get some sense into him. Francis escaped. He left a life of luxury. He left a life of wealth. And I got to tell you, when you read his writings, there was probably not a freer man on this planet than Francis of Assisi. And he has this line that I just love. It defines his life. He says this: I am who God says I am. Look, imagine every day of your life, before you go into that workplace, before you go into your school, before you even say hello to your spouse or your kids or your parents, you look at the face of God and you're reminded, I am who God says I am. And the day is so different. Does worship sound so optional now? And the third thing it does is that it gives us freedom from circumstances. It's a tough world. Awful things happen. Bo Stern tells why she has in her office this sign that says every minute. 2-word sign, every minute. It came from the fact when her husband was diagnosed just a few years ago with ALS, which typically takes a 2 to 5 year diagnosis, and the person diagnosed is going to die. And after Bo got away on her own, she threw herself face down before the Lord, and she just began to weep and to fear. She said, you're about to lose everything. Your husband is going to die. Your kids are going to be angry at God. They're going to lose their faith. You're going to die lonely and a widow. It doesn't get worse than that. But in the midst of her crying out to God, she kept hearing these 2 words, every minute. Every minute. Every minute. And she got angry at God. What does that even mean? She sensed God saying so clearly, I've gone ahead of you, and I've made a way for you. I've been to every minute you will ever face, and I've left provision for you there. Trust me, I am with you. I will never forsake you. God didn't say it wasn't a terrible circumstance. He just said, look, I've been to every minute ahead of you. I've left provision for you there. If you will look at my face every morning, we will get through this together. I know a dear elderly woman who's at that time in life where loved ones begin to die, and it breaks their heart. And one particularly close loved one died. And she went a couple months later, she was just aching and hurting. She was just sick all the time. They kept running these tests. They didn't know what it was. And finally, a very kind, wise doctor pulled her aside. And he said, look, you don't need any more medical tests. You need counseling. Your grief is making you sick. See, when you look at your grief, when you look at your loss, before you look at your Heavenly Father's face, that can happen. Circumstances can make you sick. Talked to a business owner this last week here in Houston. You know, we enjoy those low prices at the pump. But he has a business related to oil prices. This is how it's going. And he's just like, revenue is down 80%. 80%. Now his kids are part of his company. They kind of depend on what's going on. Are you going to make it? We're going to see. We've got to figure it comes around. Don't look at a loss of revenue. Don't look at a business challenge before in the morning you look at the face of God, or it's going to be terrifying. When we stop fearing God in a good way, reverencing God, fears can overwhelm us. And you know what? We live in a culture that is just overcome by fear. It's almost silly when you think about it. I thought a fascinating novel, State of Fear, Michael Crichton, intellectual, known for his scientific integrity, kind of takes on the radicalism of the environmental movement. And he's very fair-handed. He understands what's going on, but he applies science and logic to a lot of things. In it, he has a fascinating quote where I think he captures our society perfectly. He said this: fear pervades society in all its aspects, perpetually. Has it ever occurred to you how astonishing the culture of Western society really is? Industrialized nations provide their citizens with unprecedented safety, health, and comfort. Average lifespans increased 50% in the last century. Yet modern people live in abject fear. They're afraid of strangers, of disease, of crime, of the environment. They're afraid of the homes they live in, the food they eat, the technology that surrounds them. They're in a particular panic over the things they can't even see: germs, chemicals, additives, pollutants. They are timid, nervous, fretful, and depressed. Even more amazingly, they are convinced that the environment of the entire planet is being destroyed around them. Remarkable. It's just a scientist's dispassionate view. We have it better than we've ever had it, and everybody is on edge thinking we are on the brink of catastrophe. Why? Crichton doesn't make this connection, but I will. Psalm 146 would say, because we don't put our hope in the Lord. We put our hope in financial success. We put our hope in an environment that's healthy. We put our hope in a body that's healthy. We put our hope in a relationship that's happy. And everything gets turned around, which is why we have to find the freedom of worship. It sets us free from unhealthy desires. It sets us free from unhealthy people. It sets us free from unhealthy circumstances. Now, I gotta mention one thing here, because I realize even though I've defined worship, a lot of you may still think I'm talking about singing when I mention worship, and I don't mean that at all. We get this weekly brief on the teaching team of suggestions and ideas about sermons. Look, I listen to all of Ben's and Dr. Young's sermons. I don't think they ever use any of it. You kind of like to use your own stuff, but it gets your mind thinking. And this last week's brief was talking about what is worship, and it listed 9 things called the sacred pathways, 9 sacred pathways. Now, I noticed that the author of this brief didn't mention who wrote the book. Apparently that didn't matter too much. So I can't tell you who wrote the book. Maybe you could research it and find it. But I am aware of the book, and I could say I'm a fan of the book. I agree with most of what this author has said. But if you just look up at these 9 things, I don't have time to go through all of these. If you consider worship as singing, If you look at all the different ways that people relate to the God and open up their heart to apprehend His beauty, to comprehend His beauty, to have their heart aligned with His, singing is 1/3 of one of the 9 sacred pathways. It is a small sliver. It's like one chocolate chip in a bunch of chocolate chip cookie dough ice cream or something like that. It's even less than one red M&M in a bag of M&Ms or something. I gave up desserts for Lent, so I'm still trying to catch up, apparently, a little bit of an obsession there. But just think about how, if you're a naturalist, you need to get outside. You need to be surrounded by all that God has made. You need to step out of your house, unless you live in that apartment right next to I-10. Go on the Terry Hershey Trail. Get surrounded by woods and remind yourself, God is creator. He can create a way for me. If you're an intellectual, you need to read in the morning. You need to get your mindset. You need to understand new things about God. If you're a contemplative, you need to make time to sit at His feet, because if you get too busy to gaze into God's face, your priorities will go out the door and other people will begin to define you. Find out how you connect with God and then be faithful to do that. Here's what I believe God wants to say. When will you start listening to me more than you listen to everyone else? Isn't that what we do? Whether it's a news program, a newspaper, friends, a social group, a dysfunctional person in our life, we keep listening and listening, and all God is saying to worship, hey, listen to me first. I'm the way, I'm the truth, and I'm the life. Do you want to live in life? You want to live in truth? Then go to the way. Put your hope in the God of Jacob. Put your hope in the God who created the world. There are places, I believe, that God wants to take you. I believe there are hurts He wants to heal. I believe there are lies He wants to contradict, but you don't listen to Him. We don't put ourselves before His feet. We don't give Him an opportunity to change our heart. We just focus on a few little behaviors. Don't detach our desires. Let the social circles we're in just destroy our sense of esteem. Let circumstances bury us. And God is saying, don't put your hope in mortal man. Don't put your hope in mortal woman. Put your hope in me. Jeff Kemp played football for 11 years in the NFL. He's cut from the Philadelphia Eagles in 1992. That was the last team he ever played for. They had held on to him. He was the last player cut. They had held on to him, but they finally let him go, hoping they'd get a trade. They didn't get it. All his friends and family members said, don't worry, Jeff, an experienced backup quarterback, stay in shape. Somebody's going to get hurt. There's going to be an opportunity for you. So Jeff kept in shape. 4th week into the season, Dave Craig, quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks, went down with an injury. David played for that team. He was personal family friends with the coach at that time, Tom Flores. Sent him a message, hey, I'm keeping myself in shape. I know the system. I'd love to have a chance. Tom Flores left him a brutal phone message. Sorry, Jeff. We're going in another direction. We're signing a quarterback from the World League. Click. Jeff was so upset. He went outside, in his words, thought some very nasty thoughts. He said, this stinks. It's not fair. I've been praying for God now, but I'm not going to pray. I'm just going to sit here and feel this stinking pain. He said he sat there wallowing, marinating in frustration. His wife, Stacy, came out, strong believer. She said, Jeff, I can't imagine how much this hurts, but I do know after all we've been through, God is always there in the tough chapters. He's always revealed His good purpose after we've walked through them. Jeff wasn't ready to be consoled. He was still angry. He said, I know that. I just can't believe my career is finishing like this. After all I've been through, I just want to finish with some dignity. And that last line, I want to finish with some dignity, made Stacy believe she had to go into some tough love. This is a woman who worships. She said, Jeff, I don't recall Jesus leaving the earth with much dignity. As I recall, when Jesus completed His life on earth and departed, He didn't get any dignity. Maybe you need to think about letting go of that desire. Jeff's mature response as a husband was, maybe you need to go inside. But then he worshiped. He saw Christ on the cross in his mind's eyes, and he realized God was inviting him into a new life. And he would say today, one of my worst life moments turned into one of my best. Life will never make sense if you stop worshiping. It will never lose its wonder if you start and keep at it. Do you want new freedom from unhealthy desires? Do you want freedom from unhealthy people and frustrating circumstances? Become an active worshiper. Every day, get lost in the awe and wonder of God.